us to chat before your lecture as part of this Discovery Park Distinguished Lecture Series. We are so excited to have you here virtually today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. I had written that I'm so disappointed that it can't be in person. Yes. Because I truly enjoy meeting at Purdue, meeting everyone.
Yes, we hope that you will be able to visit again soon in person. So what we'll do today is we'll go ahead and introduce the three interviewers and then jump into some questions that we have in different categories here. So first of all, my name is Erika Foster. I'm a soil ecologist, and I'm particularly fascinated with soil microbes. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher here in earth sciences, working with Dr. Tim Filley on soil health and carbon sequestration, specifically in southern Peru. And I received my PhD from Colorado State and was actually lucky enough to be a sustainability leadership fellow in a science communication program organized by Dr. Wall and colleagues. And so it's fantastic to be on the other side of the science communication equation today. And I'll pass it off to my co-interviewers here for their introductions.
Thanks, Erika. So my name is Brooke McWherter.
My name is Becca Nixon.
And we are both natural resource social scientists. We work with Dr. Zhao Ma in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Our Human Dimensions Lab focuses on environment and natural resource decision-making and the trade-offs both here in Indiana, and our lab also does a lot of international work in Latin America and abroad. We are excited to have the opportunity to talk with you today and kind of talk about the intersections between social science and soil ecology.
Well, thank you, Becca.
Wonderful. So today we're going to dive into some soil science, some topics about climate change and communication, discuss a little bit of interdisciplinary research as well, and then how across all of these fields and our studies, how diversity, equity, inclusion play important roles in our field of research as well. So we wanted to start, Diana, today with something a little bit fun. And I know you've done plenty of interviews about soil biodiversity and soil organisms. And so from my understanding, one of your favorite organisms is a soil nematode. And so first of all, we want to confirm if this is in fact your favorite soil organism.
Absolutely, a nematode is my favorite soil organism.
And so we were wondering if today you could describe, since a few of our listeners might not know what a nematode does in soil, if you could just go into a day in the life of a nematode.
Okay, well, I'll tell you my favorite. I'll talk about a specific species. And it's one that I've been looking at, and this is going to shock some people who don't know what a nematode is. I've been looking at for 28 seasons in Antarctica. And a nematode is just a simple, it's an invertebrate, a round worm. It's basically, if you think about an earthworm, but only no little segments and just like a balloon, if you pop a nematode, if you stick a pin in a nematode, it's all gone. But they really are highly evolved and have all the different, digestive systems. You can see what they're eating. They're translucent, so it's really cool. You can see whether or not they're eating or what they're doing. You can't get away with anything if you're a nematode. So in a regular day, the interesting thing about having them in Antarctica and they are almost everywhere on Earth, not this particular species, but the one that I study in Antarctica is a desert, and nematodes are aquatic animals. And so it seems in the coldest, driest, windiest place on Earth with very little soils, ice-free soils, why in the world would this nematode survive there? And that's kind of what we went down, is to discover, were there any invertebrates in dry soils? And also when we found out there was only one species. And so what does it do for a regular day? Well, I guess in the long winter, it's kind of in the what do you call it? The fountain of life or whatever. It's gone into an ametabolic stage we call anhydrobiosis without water. And when winter starts, the 9 months of winter, it loses all its water, changes its metabolism, and then kind of dehydrates down and preserves its membranes. It looks like a potato chip, and it just blows around the dry valleys. So that's, pretty easy. But boy, when the water comes, when the meltwater comes from snow, or snow comes to the dry valleys and it's sunny, and this is true of any nematode, when bad conditions, bad environmental conditions are over and they get some water, they are just the most active things you've ever seen under a microscope. They are wiggling back and forth. There's just thousands of little bodies under the microscope going back and forth. And this particular one has a morphology like a vacuum cleaner. So if you can just imagine one of those robo vacuum cleaners going around your house and sucking up all the dirt, that's what a nematode does all day long. And then eventually it'll mate. It takes a long time for the life cycle in Antarctica. And then when you look at temperate ones, I know in Indiana and soils there, some nematodes have a life cycle of a year or more, and others have a life cycle faster. So it depends on the species. But it's a pretty, as long as there are microbes there, it's a pretty great life.
Wow, that's so interesting. And especially thinking about just how life exists in such extreme environments as well, and making sure that it takes advantage of when the resources are plenty.
Exactly, yeah.
No, so, and I kind of jumped in here because I am a soil ecologist, so I kind of understand that the soil is alive and there's lots of amazing critters underground that most people don't think too much about. So let's just kind of step back a little bit and talk about what drew you in to study soils. They're kind of a whole ecosystem that a lot of people don't think too much about. So what is to you is the most wonderful part about studying soils?
Well, I think what drew me in was the life in soils. And actually in graduate school, I didn't like parasites of animals because they were kind of yucky to deal with and they smelled and they're bigger. And but I did like microbiology, and I just happened to have a professor who said, oh, if you want to study parasites, there's some really cool, cleaner ones you can get out of soils that parasitize plants. And so I started out in graduate school as a plant pathologist studying nematodes. And I've got to say, there weren't thousands of people studying plant parasitic nematodes, and there still aren't. There ought to be more. But what was I think such a shock to me is after having had an undergraduate education in biology and learning about birds and their specialties and the species and the different animals that you study or the plants and the different plant species there are, to look through a microscope and realize this specific roundworm is going to know specifically where on the root it's going to feed, and it's not going to compete with anybody else. It has a morphology that will let it either feed outside the root or cause the cells to expand so it can get more food and just stay on the outside. Or it may be a type of a nematode that moves inside the root up and down and disables the metabolism of the plant. And so they're highly specialized. And that was just to realize that I could learn names of nematodes that might be just like learning names of my friends was just astounding to me. And then to later find out that, a nematode Caenorhabditis elegans, which is a bacterial feeder also, is used in medical studies for humans to look at disease and that sort of thing. It was one of the first nematode sequence. This whole connection of nematodes and waters and the crust of the earth, I guess, got me interested into soil. And it took me that way, not as in a come in from soil science way.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty amazing too, to be fascinated by the topic and then also have it have so many other applications as well. I hadn't heard that about the first nematode sequence. That's really cool. And not only is it really interesting in terms of the diversity and different niches within the soils, but there are so many different ecosystems you can explore as a soil ecologist. And I know that you've had many incredible field expeditions. And so we just wanted you to describe one of your favorite experiences in the field and give people a little bit of a flavor of what a day could look like.
Yeah, well, I think any day in the field is a great day. Let's put it that way. When you get to go out to the field and do an experiment or sample soil. But even here, going out to the grasslands here, the shortgrass steppe, or going to Kansas to the Kanza Prairie where the tall grass prairie is. You know, we always have it pretty well thought out before we go. It's looking at nematodes and sampling in the field is not high tech, mass specs, lots of gadgets. It is pretty much taking a soil core, if you can use one, you know, and depending on what the question is you're asking, that's kind of determines where you sample. Like if you're looking at, does plant diversity drive below ground diversity? You might look at lots of plant species right around, so you have lots of roots, and that may affect the diversity below ground. But we take very small, about inch wide cores, samples to depth of about 10 centimeters. And we're very careful about bringing them back up and bagging them in a plastic bag that is kind of, it's not sterile, I wouldn't call it sterile, but to keep them separate so there's no contamination from another soil particle. Because since nematodes are so small, you can transfer them just carrying your, you know, just walking from one site to another. You might have soil on your bottom of your feet, and then you carry it into another system. So then we take a number of samples, and let's say we're taking control versus not. We've got this soil sample in the bag. We usually take replicates, you know, for an experiment, of course. And we may have a site that has soil temperature, soil moisture, so that we've got all this background information on what's happening. And then we just take them back to the lab, and we've probably already decided and worked out a comparison extraction method for that particular soil type. And we will do either wash them out of soil with a centrifugal solution, and get them into water, or we might do a Behrman funnel, which is just a funnel and you put the soil on the top and the nematodes move down through a funnel, and you've got kind of a paper to stop the mud from going through. And we collect those, and then we start looking at them and identifying. And by identifying, I do not mean identifying the species, because there's so many nematode species that are unknown. So we usually put them into functional groups first, because they occupy all functional levels of the food web. I'm probably getting too detailed, but it's pretty cool to me. And we get them into bacterial feeders, fungal feeders, plant parasites, or omnivores, and they're predators with teeth. They're nematodes with teeth. I mean, they're all very different, these functional groups. And then, you know, we will start doing the stats on them. But I would say it's 6 hours for every hour in the field for basically a few samples. And so when we take 500, when we're say in the Antarctic, and it's much easier soil to clean, it's days and days and days and days of counting. Mm-hmm. So that still is the slow part, is knowing what you're counting and who's there, as always.
Definitely. So that's, I mean, it seems like, yeah, that kind of gave us a good vision of the whole process, from actual going out into the field in Antarctica all the way into the lab as well. And what's really amazing too, and I think when you get to this point in your career, is that the amazing ability you have to narrow in, like, on a specific nematode species, so to speak, and then also broaden all the way back out. And so I have kind of one final but really large question for you relative to soil science, is kind of this network that's expanding in the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative that you're very involved with, and also a rapidly growing number of other global soil science networks, and even just networks in sustainability and climate change science. And so from your perspective, and maybe using the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative as an example, can you describe some broad principles for developing an impactful network? So we're living in this age of big data and synthesis and harmonization. And so what do you think the three or so principles are for developing impactful networks?
Well, I think number one, you have to decide what you want this to do, because it can get out of hand and way beyond you. And I think that's the biggest decision. Is it going to be one that's going to help highlight experiments? Is it going to be one that's going to try to connect people for experiments and for research? Is it going to be a data collection? Are you trying to educate the public about, and I mean here, teachers, just your general public, on why soils and soil biodiversity is important? So all those questions have to be answered. So know your question, know your network, know what you all want to do, because it's so easy to get broken into one of these: education, research, teaching. And then I think the next thing is, how about, don't make it so big at the start, unless you really know everybody, but just have 4 or 5 people who are committed to getting this off the ground. And that is the ones you're going to be, oh my gosh, we haven't thought about this. What do we do about it? You know, that may be written down somewhere, but we didn't know it. We definitely did not have it written down on how to run a global soil biodiversity initiative. I figured, you know, that it would be over in about 2 to 3 years. And instead, because we wanted to make sure that our goal was to take research and data better to policymakers. And so we had stair steps along the way. First, bring the community together to see if they're interested. How broad was our community going to be? And so we had meetings, you know, big meetings. I was stunned. The first one we had in Dijon was something like 700 people.
Yeah.
And that 2 years later, it was over 1,000 in China. And so, you know, it's the idea that it was broad enough to bring people who are interested in biogeochemistry and organisms and taxonomy and genes and microbiome. You know, we want to connect people together because they all know something. And the other part of it was we wanted to inform the policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
So we quickly, I would say, that's number one. Number two, who are your partners going to be? As far as I'm concerned, we welcome everybody. I always like to know who are the other global soil people. We'll put them on our web page, because somebody out of this group of, they're really not collaborators. It's just a website where you come and say, hey, look at all these global papers that are being done. People put all this data together. Isn't that cool? We just put the papers up. You know, we don't knit people together so much. But also we did do an atlas for policymakers, and we paired with that. Our partner was the European Union. And so that helped a lot because they paid for the publishing. The 5 of us couldn't have done that. And so I think that who your partners are going to be, who is, the last one I would think is, what are your activities going to be? So you can focus on those. And, you know, we want to have another big meeting and bring people in, and particularly early career scientists, people who may have more of an urban feel for soils, you know, just to generalize. And then also, what has happened to the Southern Hemisphere? You know, we've got to get them more involved. They're on all our webinars. We also run a webinar. And yesterday we had over 1,000 people on the webinar registered, and the number of countries was just startling. We could never have done that just by having a physical meeting where everybody got to see each other. So I guess, you know, to go back, I would say, know what you want your network to do. Understand what it's, the partners that you're going to have to help it feed off each other to build it. And then know your activities and what you really can do with it. And then I think it just takes off.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so incredible. And it's so great to see the success of that initiative as well.
Yeah.
And if folks are really interested, I encourage you to go and check out their website. And the Biodiversity Atlas is really incredible, and some of the maps and data that they've aggregated. So, and I think that leads in perfectly to our next kind of part, and I'll hand it over to Brooke to talk a little bit more about science communication. So thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Erika. Yeah, Dr. Wall, everything you were mentioning, I was like, communication, interdisciplinary research, it's all in there. And so, you know, I think one of the really interesting parts about the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, the program in the school, is that it includes implementing and teaching science communication practices, which I don't think is something that's widely done yet across academia. So could you tell the audience a little bit more, like, why is this an important skill set for scientists to know?
Well, I think it is happening more than it did 20 years ago, that's for sure. I think it's partially two things. It's really important to do that now because society is asking more of what's happening. Not everybody understands all the details of climate change. I don't understand all the details of climate change. Not everybody understands all the details of, say, biodiversity loss and how these fit together. And so I think when they're asking us, we can't all run to one person in our department and say, George does that, Sally does that. They can go talk to the media.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's an important, it is important, and we've made it a priority. And it's important to know the types of media. Not everybody has to be somebody on TV on a talk show. I mean, I would run from that. But I think you need to know, oh, an opinion piece might be useful, or talking to a local group might be useful, whoever they are. Talking to teachers or school kids or parents or whatever your niche is. But you've got to know all the forms, from newspaper, letters to the editor, opinion pieces, to actually doing assessments or participating in a soil biodiversity assessment. We just had one come out and there were 300 scientists who contributed to it. That wasn't writing down their data. Mm-hmm. That was writing it for policymakers, what their data meant. And of course it went through lots of changes, that the pages did. But that is something, assessments may be more legal, I would put legal over there in a scientific world. But I think because society asks so much for us, we have a real obligation to say, I'm not a total expert at this, but here's what I know from my work in snails, and tell it. And I think there's ways to learn to get rid of your jargon. And that is something that I hadn't thought about before I went through science communication. How do you not say anhydrobiotic like I did in the first paragraph of a meeting with you all? So I think that there's a number of ways that scientists can contribute. And I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think when you're trained in it, it makes you a lot more comfortable that you're not going to be misquoted or thrown to the wolves.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I know when you said that word, I was like, so it's like nematode hibernation almost.
That's a much better word. Much better.
And I'm sure as a biologist, you're like, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And I think, we hear in a lot of conferences that the public wants to know more. They do want to understand what we're saying. And I think that's a great contribution of the school, and hopefully more scientists will become more engaged with that and learning how to communicate for themselves what their work is, right? And have a role in that. I'm going to switch topics a little bit and talk about climate change. Climate change is often called a wicked problem. It's highly complex and it touches various aspects of our environment and society, and interdisciplinary research has been such as a promising way to address these complex problems, right? But as we all know, interdisciplinary research can come with its own challenges. Mm-hmm. And I was curious, as both like a researcher and the founding director of the School of Global Environment and Sustainability, what are the main challenges you see that still exist in promoting and supporting interdisciplinary climate change research? And perhaps one of the opportunities that you see coming up in the future?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I don't think anybody has totally solved it yet. I think we've made our stab at it, but it would be really good to talk to a number of universities who attempted this, before I go any further. I think our challenges have been, when you talk about sustainability and climate change, it opens up to me immediately, I have to know somebody who is in the economics of how society runs. Why do they want our natural resources? The economics person has to know something about what is climate change going to do to the natural resources that is going to affect our crops, our food, our water, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then I think the people in natural resources have to realize and I think they do, that it's not just a direct hit on the environment. What they're studying, say, leaf phenology or, animal hibernation, they realize that they should be talking to the broader, seeing the impact on society and what society wants to do to stop it. And I think that has been the biggest challenge that we've had. And the way we've done it is several ways. I mean, the way we've attempted to do it, I should say, is one, who do you know on campus that's doing climate change research? Well, when you ask that question, there's going to be people from biology to engineering. Everybody who's working, not just on energy or, wind towers, they're going to be people working in different areas, say algae or microbes, or they're wanting to know how resilient is a water system or a stream or a river if we have extreme climate events. So what we've done is a couple of things. We have global challenge research teams, and people apply for, it's small seed money, it's very small, and they can apply once a year. They have to construct teams that are not in their same college. So they have to be reaching out to the liberal arts or reaching out to, engineering, whatever. And they have to just have a topic and what they're going to do. And we don't care whether the project works or not. We want some creative thinking and some trust building. Even if it doesn't work, all of a sudden those people know connections they haven't known across campus. And I think that really helps. And they also interact with other global challenge research teams. Mm-hmm. I think there's a number of ways that people can do that. And I'll just give you that one example for us.
No, that's a great example. Have you heard things from the people who have participated in that program, like what their experiences have been like?
Yeah, and we've had some stop and just say, we don't need to go any further. We didn't realize how much was done. It was a bunch of people from history wanted to talk to national parks about climate change. What had they noticed in the past? What had management looked at? And so all of a sudden, the climate change scientists were reading history, about the past extreme events, or we have webinars where we do the same. No, they used to be Abo's beer Managing the Planet series panelists, but now they're webinars. We're having one tomorrow on the Dust Bowl, because a historian, we've got a historian on the panel. There are 4 people, but they have to be from different colleges. So atmospheric scientist, historian who's written on labor and what happened to jobs from the impact of the Dust Bowl, an ecologist who's going to talk about what his research now shows for extreme events that are, in the future, mm-hmm. and then an atmospheric scientist who's hindcast all that data to move it forward. So we try to pull people together on important topics. And again, it's not only building the trust, but it's kind of like interdisciplinary research can be, I'll go out and do my thing in the field, you go do your thing, and then at the end of the time when we have to have an annual report, oops, what do we find? What you really want is multidisciplinary understanding in valuing what the other person brings to it. And that can sometimes be fast or sometimes not so fast.
Yeah. Well, it seems like there's a lot of great processes that are going to build a lot of really creative projects at your university over time.
I would say one strong thing that has to happen is that the academic structure for rewarding and incentivizing the type of research that we're going to need to go after these urgent problems of sustainability, that has to change. And it is changing in some places, and people are looking into it. But we have to be incentivized by, oh, wow, by working at your school, my dean knows I gave a webinar the other night at the beer joint,
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, as part of building sustainable communities here at Purdue, we are actually doing a graduate group. So we're reaching out with historians and talking about the environment. And it's such an amazing experience to hear about all these different ways that these different disciplines touch on our own fields. And it comes up with new ideas for doing it. So that's really exciting. All right, well, I will move on. Otherwise, I'll talk with you about this all day. But let my colleague, Becca, talk to you a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. So Dr. Wall, we wanted to conclude today by talking a little bit about, as Brooke mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been increasingly topics of conversation. And we know that you at the School of Global Environment and Sustainability have been also engaging in this, especially recently. So our first question is, for your role, you've been a champion for women in science. You've conducted tons of field work in male-dominated spaces. In other interviews, you've spoken about the glass ceilings that you've encountered in your work. So I'm wondering if, based on these experiences, you could talk about the advice you would give to all students, not just women, but all students and scientists about overcoming adversity in their work, and what your experience has taught you about supporting underrepresented groups, especially in our field.
Okay, that's a lot to, we could go for an hour on just this alone, I know. This is why I wish I was there in person. It would be so interesting. I think everybody has some advice for what you would say for students, but for underrepresented and well, actually this is for everybody. I would say, do what you love, be persistent. You know, there's going to be people who aren't going to let you do it, but you'll find a way. You know, think of 7 elegant solutions to get around them, and just go there. And I don't think you want people to tell you what to do. You want to learn their knowledge, learn what they can teach you, but you are a different person, and therefore you could go forward. I think it isn't that we need to cater to any particular person necessarily that I'm talking about. Is what we need to do is give everybody an equal chance to succeed. And we don't do that. And so there's ways that we can do that. As I wish I'd known a lot of these when I was younger. But things like, what kind of panel are we putting together? I can't believe this panel. I mean, how much more attention is now being paid to, with all due respect, my white guy friends. You know, I look at it and say, whoa, you're not going to do that. Come on, you know, what about so-and-so over in such and such a department? And so I think there is more recognition, and we need to keep that up, that everybody deserves an equal chance. And let's start pushing that, particularly for underrepresented groups. We want them to succeed. The brains are out there, and by suppressing them, we're not getting anywhere. And I think you know, at the school, there's amazing staff that I work with. And that staff is right on top of, we're going to do something now. And things that are simple. I mean, we don't have labs or anything like that in ours, but we have events. We can set a standard. And so we're trying to set a standard that's high quality. Secondly, I think just in between the staff, they decided that they would read. Our president had a book, and I'll send you that later if you're interested, but a book that said, we're just going to have a discussion about this on campus. And so the staff that work at the school all said, yeah, we're going to do this. And so I think in science, it's partially academic. I mean, there's that, what is it, the stats, so in MIT in the biology department, were something like 14% in 2009, I've forgotten, I wrote it down somewhere, 2009, I guess, and then in 2019, it was the same thing. I mean, that is not increasing women. You know, you could take 100 years and you'd increase women in the biology department there. So there has to be effort, and I think the effort has to come also from us. That's what I recognize now that I didn't recognize when I was a graduate student, that I would just say, oh, well, I'll just leave that to the academics. So that's my first goal that I could give you.
Yeah, it's true. We could talk about it for days, and people do clearly, but I love that advice of doing what you love coupled with this very practical advice of learning and reading through book clubs and thinking more critically about who's on our panels, who's talking, who has the microphone. So another specific question.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's a huge part of sustainability. I mean, we have to also think that what we do and realize what we do changes the world. And I still believe that, you know, one of me may not change the world, but I may influence somebody else, and that just rolls. And this inequity, environmental inequity, environmental justice, these are big issues that we have to embrace in academia and in sustainability. So, okay, next question.
That's a No, that's a perfect segue to the next question. So last summer, the School of Global Environmental Sustainability published a statement on anti-racism that states the field of sustainability cannot begin to address social and environmental justice without actively working towards anti-racism. So you just mentioned it, but can you talk a little bit more about how we as scientists can work towards anti-racism in our own work and how that is vital to our field of sustainability?
Well, I think there's two different ways. Well, there's more than two. Okay, so let me just say, as scientists or anybody involved, social scientist involved in sustainability, we have to re-examine where our biases are coming from. Whereas we might want to write a grant, go to a meeting, have a meeting on campus, take new lab members into our department. Are we really being conscious of our biases? Or can somebody point out to us that, hey, you really want a diverse department? It's going to just have so much energy. And so I think that's one. And then I think, they're doing a lot of trainings on our campus. I mean, it's really wonderful. It's the number one thing of the president right now. And so there are all these different classes on how you can embrace and learn the different biases that go with different people. And then how do you incorporate that into your academic life? Well, I think that there's many ways. Our parties, our beer parties, how we communicate with people. Hey, I want to know more about you. It starts with us. It also takes support from the top that we are going to change that. So pressure on the top also. And if they are leading, then what more can we do to take it to the next step? How do we set a goal of saying, in 10 years, this campus will be X. And that's what the students want to see. That's what the administrators want to see. What's stopping us in doing this? And so then I think that there's lots of connections that have to be made.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Wall. I really appreciate it. And I think that combination of from the top, as well as examining our individual bias, is a really important thing to be thinking about how we address this on all levels, especially in academia.
I'll also say,
I do. Oh.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you. I keep thinking of things. But I also would say that there are meetings that are more diverse that we probably don't think about going to or submitting papers to. And that is another way to learn and get a different audience and get some diversity into your science.
Yeah, that's a great practical step, right? Getting out of our academic echo chamber that we so often find ourselves in. So with that, I do want to conclude the formal interview with Dr. Wall. I want to thank Dr. Wall for joining us today, and the other interviewees, Brooke and Erika, as well as the audience listening today. And we look forward to seeing you again on April 4th for your lecture on global soil biodiversity, and hopefully in person at Purdue in the near future as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Erika. Brooke, it was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today.